Well, hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Jared Nelson, and we have a guest with us today, Mr. Steve Tipton. And we know that you all love it when we have Steve on, because you have told me. Scott is nowhere to be found. We think maybe he's at youth camp. His house had lead stuff going on, and the state was making him clean it out last week, so maybe he got stuck somewhere in a basement or a crevice. Do they have basements up in that part of the world? We don't have them down here, so I don't know. Jared,
I
are there
think they have
basements in that part of the world?
Oh, definitely. All over
okay.
Illinois.
Okay, yeah. Cool. I've heard of basements. They sound cool. I'd love to be a part of one day.
You believe they exist, but you have no personal experience.
With as many tornadoes
right.
as there are in the Midwest, you have to have basements.
Yeah, you'd think that we'd have basements for that purpose here in the Delta, but nope, we just hide inside our bathrooms, which are not safe at all. We just a little bit of housekeeping. We're still, well, actually, I don't know when this is going to air, but hey, send us a note as to how Polity Matters has been helpful for you, and we will put you into a drawing to get a copy of Per Almquist's new commentary that he signed for us at General Assembly. And I mean, just to be upfront, it's not creatively signed. He didn't, dedicate it or anything. There's no inscription. It is literally just his name. Almost looks like it was printed above his name in the title page of the book. So,
I think he actually gives us the secrets of BCO 44 in it.
Ooh. Maybe he skipped forward and wrote those in that chapter and I didn't catch it. Wow, that's impressive. We are here today to talk about BCO 41. BCO 39, you'll remember from last time, lists the modes by which acts and decisions of a lower court are brought under the supervision of a higher court. And so last week, when we referenced that, we talked with Fred about general review and control. And now we're getting into the other three modes that these things happen by, which are reference, appeal, and complaint. And so we're getting into references. Steve, I was just going to pitch to you real quick. Anything we need to say or think about before we get into Chapter 41 and the particulars of it?
Yeah. So as you just said, there are a number of ways that acts and decisions of lower courts are brought up to higher courts. There is the general way, the normal way, I guess you could say, or the ordinary way, right? Review and control. Presbyteries review the minutes of the courts below them. The General Assembly reviews the records of the courts below them, et cetera. And then there are kind of three extraordinary ways: reference, appeal, and complaint. Obviously, appeal and complaints are for other episodes, but they're dealing with particular decisions. A reference is generally an issue that is before a lower court, and they're having some difficulty dealing with that issue, right? So they need help. They're referring the issue to a higher court, either for advice or just simply to dispose of the matter altogether. And so, Chapter 41 is, again, detailing how all those things work. And it's probably not, in one sense, so helpful to kind of go section by section by section. Probably better, kind of what we're doing now is just kind of thinking about them broadly and generally, and then the sections sort of give specific advice as to how the higher court is to deal with them, and then even what the lower court needs to do, even as they're making a reference. But generally speaking, references are kind of two different varieties, what we might call non-judicial and a judicial reference. A non-judicial reference is primarily some decision that the lower court is question the lower court is trying to answer, and for whatever reason they don't feel that they have the capacity to answer that question, to sufficiently answer it, and so they're going to refer that question to a higher court.
What would be like an example of that?
Yeah, so like
y'all are just going to get into the whole thing now.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Sounds good.
We're just going to get into it. We're going to dive in. Perhaps a question regarding the interpretation of a particular portion of the Constitution. So every court has the responsibility and the right to interpret the Constitution for themselves. Although, again, that's subject to general review and control. But there may be an aspect of the BCO that, I mean, far be it from us to say this, there may be some aspect of the BCO that is confusing or is hard to understand. And so the lower court could refer a question on how to understand, how to interpret, how to bring into action some aspect of the BCO. Sometimes, although I said there's judicial and non-judicial, sometimes those non-judicial references are touching the judicial process, right? So, how do we fulfill the requirements of the rules of discipline in this particular case, or what is a censure? What censures are available in this particular circumstance, or whatever? And so there can be some benefit to appealing to a broader knowledge base, right? Maybe in my little church with my handful of elders, we've never thought about or had to deal with a case of, trying to think of an example, a child who, refuses to obey their parents. I mean, that's whatever. I can't imagine a church that's never faced that, but it's the only thing I can think of. And so we're appealing to the larger body to say, what are some ways that our Constitution, touches this issue, deals with that issue. And it may be the case that somebody in the presbytery has dealt with that situation. Perhaps a better example, Ben, feel free to cut the last example, but a better example would be something like, we have a ordained ruling elder who has gone to seminary and now wants to become, a teaching elder. Although this is more a question for the presbytery anyway, but, do we need to reordain him, or do we need to just simply install him? I mean, that's a question of interpreting the Constitution that maybe the court that's handling that issue doesn't really know the answer. And so they might refer it to a higher court to give an answer on that. And some examples, all you really have to do is go back and look at CCB's, the Committee on Constitutional Business's minutes for the last, 50 years or whatever. They handle non-judicial references. And so the types of questions that they're asked are obviously the types of questions some presbyteries had at different points, and how to interpret the Constitution. What does the Constitution mean in this given instance or this given circumstance?
And you can find a lot of those answers in Smith's commentary. Almquist has some, and the BCO, PCA history webpage will have some of their past answers. And so there may be times in which you're going to ask something that has been asked before, and you can just go there and find the answer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, here, let's get into it.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Let's tease out some of these sections, because I think we're going to get into all these details in much more. I mean, Jared, is there anything you want to refer to before we do this?
Any references you'd like to make?
Let me refer everybody to 41.1. A reference is a written representation and application made by a lower court to a higher court for advice or other action on a matter pending before the lower court, and is ordinarily to be made to the next higher court. So we've already gotten into it a little bit. There's a reason, right? Usually a lower court is going to make reference because they need help with something, and that's going to be in 41.2. But I think mainly what I want to look at here is what's this ordinarily it's to be made to the next higher court. I don't think it's implying that references can go down.
No. Well, yeah, I mean, that would be kind of odd to refer a matter to a lower court.
GA refers to
the emphasis is on the word next, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the General Assembly refers a matter to the session of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Panama City, Florida.
Right.
Say, all right, no, we'll deal with it now. Yeah. Ordinarily the next higher. So you can send something directly to the General Assembly, obviously, again, through Committee on Constitutional Business. And I'd served on it for a couple of years. I don't recall any, off the top of my head, I don't recall getting any references from sessions per se. But at least here, ordinarily, you could do that. I think, perhaps you might want to particularly if you were in a certain instance where you believed that the presbytery had a particular view that you didn't agree with. Like let's say they found something in your minutes and you think you did it right and they don't think you did. What would be the point of referring that issue back to the very body that you already know kind of what their opinion is, so you could refer it to the next higher? But that's more on the advice section.
So would this be something that you would ask for advice before you do something? You're like, if we do this, we might get pinged. Let's just ask them if we can beforehand, so that we at least have a little bit of cover if this becomes an issue.
Yeah. Well, and I think the language even on the matter that is pending before the lower court, that in one sense the proper way, or maybe not the proper way, but a proper way you could imagine this is, let's imagine we're a session right now and we're debating a difficult topic, and there's a motion on the floor to do something and we're discussing it, and we decide that we don't have enough information and or we are divided in how we think the Constitution applies in that particular instance, then a motion to refer this to the presbytery for advice would be sort of a procedural I know most sessions really don't operate on that level of Robert's rules, but just the idea would be a motion to refer to the presbytery for advice, or even to take action on the matter, to decide because we can't. Those things would be appropriate. And in one sense, the matter that is pending is this idea that it is a live topic of discussion. Now, again, sessions, particularly, and I imagine almost all of them do, operate under more the relaxed Robert's rules for like a small committee type of thing. And so you can have discussion when there's not even an emotion on the floor. And that's fine and good. And you ought to do that. There's no reason to have the level of formality at a 10-member session or whatever. But even as you're discussing that matter and you're saying, okay, again, it's difficult, we're divided, whatever it is. I know I'm talking about 41-2, Ben, but then we're going to send that up because we need that advice, we need that action, or we need them to take action on it. And in that sense, I think it's less a hypothetical than it is a concrete particular that the session is dealing with. It's not trivia time. It's not try to stump the CCB, but rather we're actually dealing with this and we don't know how to proceed, and so we need your help.
Almquist makes a point here. He says that sometimes the ordinarily could be a situation where a presbytery has received a reference from a session and they just don't know what to do, and so they send it straight up to the GA right away. And so it's not necessarily bypassing the presbytery as much as it is just they don't respond to it, but they give it to the next court to respond to instead.
Yeah. Well, and I think even in that instance, the presbytery is still taking the action to refer it to the next level. So, I think the next time I'm going to write an overture, to combine 41 through 6 into one paragraph. I think they all belong together for the ease of future episodes. That's right. Yeah.
41-2, among proper subjects for reference are matters that are new, delicate, or difficult, or on which the members of the lower court are very seriously divided, or which relate to questions involving the Constitution and legal procedures respecting which the lower court feels the need of guidance. So you might have somebody send a reference that says, hey, we've never seen this before. We don't know what to do. Or this is a very delicate situation and we don't trust ourselves to handle it properly. We need more wisdom. Or we don't know what we're doing. Please help. That could be one that, that goes up. It's interesting here, isn't it, that there could be division in a court. So if a session is split, Pear has a reference, I think, in his book on this where he says, a presbytery tried a case twice and they kept getting split tie votes on the judicial decision, and so they sent it up to be tried by the GA, I think. Or maybe that was just an example he made, but or constitutional difficulties if you don't know what to do, which we've already talked about a fair amount. So, Jared, what you got? You're muted. Can't hear you.
You're still muted.
I was just going to say, this seems like it would look different for advice versus action, right? So advice, you're trying to get some advice so that you can act on it. But if you're in a place in which you're like, we don't think that we can do this, you can take the action and say, you guys are going to be the ones that have to do this. In fact, this happened fairly recently, didn't it, with a judicial case where a presbytery referred a case to the SJC. And it's one of the, I think the first case of the SJC actually tried as the SJC because I think it was Central Indiana just said, we don't want to try this case. Like we feel like there's enough things that are going wrong. We keep on being told we've done something wrong. Why don't you guys just do it for us, I guess?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think in that situation, I mean, it was a lot of these things. There was a lot that was new that was going on. Definitely delicate. It was very difficult. They were seriously divided in how to proceed and how to go forward with it. And I mean, it really wasn't we just don't want to do this. It was, we've been trying to do this for over a year and keep getting sort of stymied in some sense along the way. And so I think in those senses, it's very helpful. But also, think about particularly like in a church setting where you have, let's say the session files charges against one of its own members, like a ruling elder, and everybody on the session is both supposed to be witnesses and somebody has to be a prosecutor. And then you have, then they're all supposed to be judges at the same time. And there's just no way for them to even be able to do the judicial work because of the nature of the issue. That would be one of those cases where a reference would be, in one sense, I mean, I don't want to say required, but certainly required in the sense of there's absolutely no way for us to do this.
So typically you would
two-member
wait.
Session, right?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, so typically you would ask for advice and then defer that action until you got the answer back. Maybe unlike what Overtures did this last year, in which they asked for advice and they kept on moving and didn't wait for them to get an answer back from CCB. But so typically if you're asking for advice, you're waiting on the action. If you're referencing the action, you're just like, okay, you guys do it.
You're too slow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I think, references sort of contain both of those ideas though. So, but there's a difference though, I think, with what you're describing. So a court, particularly a court that has committees, can refer items to other committees for advice, but they're not binding themselves to even wait for that or anything like, I mean, in one sense. I mean, obviously, if you just make a motion to refer it to the administration committee, it's taken out of your hands and given to the administration committee. In that case, you have one committee saying, sure, we'd love to get their advice. But anyway, that was slightly different. But as a session, if you're going to refer something to the presbytery or the presbytery is going to refer something to the General Assembly, then they certainly ought to. I mean, the idea is you should wait until you get that response back. The trouble, of course, with CCB is it meets once a year outside of some sort of special. I mean, if they get a reference, they can meet, but they rarely do. They usually wait until April or whatever, and then they give you a reference, and it could be 11 months after, you're like, I don't understand what to do.
What took so long? Yeah. Golly, guys.
I imagine that if we got a reference, CCB got a reference, like let's say in May, and it was significant, and a lower court was really struggling in how to interpret something, they would probably have a called meeting. You can do that, super easy these days with Zoom or whatever. So I mean, they probably would do something like that, but there's no outside of the CCB agreeing to take it up. There's really no mechanism to do that. Whereas with a presbytery, at least you have more regular meetings.
That's good.
Where they can meet and make a decision and give you an answer. So,
well, here, let's look at 41.3. What can a reference include? What can they actually do? So there's subjects of references, but what can they ask for? 41.3 gets at that. In making a reference, the lower court may ask for advice only, or for final disposition of the matter referred. And in particular, it may refer a judicial case with request for its trial and decision by the higher court. So, I mean, as I'm reading this, Steve, the semicolon is what divides the non-judicial from the judicial. So you can get advice or you can get a decision from the higher court on something, or it can be a judicial case and you're requesting them to take care of business for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and even under like non-judicial references, I don't know of any instances in the PCA where a presbytery, sent to the General Assembly and said, we're referring to you the matter of whether or not we should have 4 stated meetings rather than 3. You decide and you
right.
tell us, or something like that. So that final disposition of the matter referred is very rare, maybe even, dare I say, non-existent, in the history of the PCA. But it's at least a possibility where you can say, and I think it's more likely, just again, given the reality of the circumstances, it's more likely that a session would say, the decision we need to make on this is so difficult, or we're so divided. It's not a judicial case, but we're asking you to make a decision on this matter. And then the presbytery could, we'll get to that later, they could take it up and make a decision. But when it comes to a judicial case, it does seem that in that instance, you're not asking for, advice about the judicial process, which I would still consider to be in many ways a non-judicial reference. Mm-hmm. But you are actually saying, we want you to take up this judicial matter, be it a case without process, be it even a 31-2 investigation. In theory, you could ask the SJC to take that on for you, or an appeal or a complaint. Obviously those are slightly different things, but
or a reference
or a reference.
You refer a reference.
Yeah. Well, but again, yeah. So it is that you're asking them to, in a judicial reference, you're actually asking them to basically become the court of original jurisdiction on that issue.
Yeah, Pear made a point I thought was really interesting. And Jared, I don't know if other guys referenced this or not, but there was I didn't read Morton on this, that the 12th General Assembly had a constitutional inquiry about what precisely is passed up to the higher court in a judicial reference. Is it that all they're allowed to do is try the case, or can they amend the indictment and the charges? Can they investigate more? And the constitutional inquiry response was basically that the whole matter goes up as if that it belongs to that next higher court originally, and they can do anything that's allowable. They're permitted to take action in any of those ways. And so, yeah, amending the charges, things like that, which is pretty cool. And of course you don't want to hand, it's not like we're handing it up, but tying an arm behind their back, right? They get to do whatever is necessary to deal with the matter. And we'll talk about some more things related to that in these other sections.
Well, yeah, it is kind of like, in a way, a double-edged sword, right? You're saying, I can't do it. We're giving it to you. But then you don't get to determine how the higher court actually conducts the case, deals with the matter, what decision they make, what censure they give. If you're going to refer it, you have to be willing to allow that higher court to actually deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one other thing, if I could say,
come on.
And this is one of the difficulties too with judicial cases, is that when a lower court gives by reference a judicial case to a higher court, you lose a level of appeal. Mm-hmm. So when a session says we can't deal with this, we're going to give it to presbytery, at least in that instance, the church member still has an ability to appeal that decision to the SJC. But when the SJC took the reference from Central Indiana, there was no opportunity for appeal. There was no higher court you could take it to. And so that's one of the reasons why, at least historically, I know the SJC has been very reticent to take those kind of references because of that reality. Now, on the other side, most of the appeals that come to the SJC, not all of them, but many of them are alleging sort of technical defects in what the lower court did. And again, at least in theory, when you hand a case over to the SJC, the men who read these court cases all the time and are supposed to be the most knowledgeable in the PCA about these judicial matters, their capacity to make an error in procedure should be less than you might find at the average presbytery or even the average session. But still, you do lose the level of appeal. So,
little known fact: when the SJC doesn't know what to do, they refer up to Polity Matters. So, just so everybody knows.
I didn't know that. Okay, yeah.
Well, they'll tell you when your initiation takes place. You'll
after my hazing.
You were told, that's right. After all that's done, I think I was trying to read through a little bit. Almquist is the only one I read this week, by the way, if anybody can tell. Almquist talks about this in 41.3, saying that the higher court can do only what's asked of them. I don't know why he made that point here in particular, but he says, like, look, if the lower court makes reference asking for advice, that's all that the higher court can do. We're going to talk about in a minute how they're not required to, but that's all that they can provide. They can't take jurisdiction of the matter and take action on the issue for the lower court. They can only do what's been asked of them. And so we'll get into a little bit more of that in 41.5 here in a second in terms of their obligation and things. So, Jared, you good? Okay. 41.4. A reference may be presented to the higher court by one or more representatives appointed by the lower court for this purpose. It should be accompanied with so much of the record as shall be necessary for proper understanding and consideration of the matter referred. This reads to me kind of like how a church is supposed to show up at Presbyterian and prosecute the call upon the teaching elder they want to be their minister. It doesn't always happen by a representative. It just is often in writing. And these days, the way things are electronically, that's what's going to happen. But the important part maybe we should talk about is that a reference needs to be accompanied with as much of the record as is necessary for the matter to be dealt with. You don't hand a halfway thought through idea up and ask for them to do the rest of the research for you, basically.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of those areas where another of my jobs, well, I don't have it anymore, but where I was helping out the administrative committee with, even there's, non-judicial references, there's judicial references, and then there's email the stated clerk of the PCA, which has, no standing in one sense. It's just, not even pious advice sometimes. But so we would get questions all the time. And as you answer the question that's presented in the email, and then you get a 4-page response and you find out, oh, you didn't tell me everything. Mm-hmm. You asked me one very specific question, and then now you're going to try to use that and shoehorn that into a situation that is not entirely different, but the context matters. And now, whoa, wait, that's not what I was saying. I wasn't telling you could do that or you couldn't do that or whatever. And so I think in a similar situation here, the record is probably going to be minutes in that sense. I mean, that's really all you have, unless it's maybe, a committee's minutes or something like that, or some narrative that the clerk can provide. But that it's going to give enough information to the higher court that they know what you're asking and why you're asking, and as much information as they can so that they can make a decision, and they don't have to come back to you. I mean, that's one great thing about having a representative, because they can ask or they can answer questions the higher court may have about the issue. But ultimately, you need enough information that you can make a really good response to. I will say that this is probably observed more in its breach with the CCB committee. I mean, most of the times you get just, like 2-sentence questions, yeah. and everybody's like, what's behind this? What else is going on here? And then there are others that they give you plenty of information and you can answer them, but it seems more often than not, it's just a very, simple question. But it's the it's the circumstances and the implications of that can be much more difficult.
And the provision for references for advice gives it a little bit more of an official flavor than I think we've all done unofficial references, whether it was email the clerk or whether it's just call it my buddy.
Email Fred Greco.
Yeah, email Fred Greco or Steve Tipton or Howie or something like that and say, hey, what's your advice on this?
You know Fred Greco? Oh,
yeah. And so I think then a court would actually take and use an official reference versus just saying like, hey, I called up my buddy and this is what he said. I'm like, well, that's a little less formal.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, when I was working for the AC, I mean, that was like one of the scariest parts is thinking someone's going to stand up in a Presbyterian meeting and say, well, Steve Tipton in this email from the AC said, and again, have it used in a way that was entirely, tangential to the question they were actually asking or whatever else. So yeah, that was always a little bit frightening. That's why there's a disclaimer at the bottom of your email that's like 7 pages long, telling you this is only advice, this, et cetera, but not legal advice. So
41.5. Although references are sometimes proper, in general, it is better that every court should discharge the duty assigned it under the law of the church. A higher court is not required to accede to the request of the lower, but it should ordinarily give advice when so requested. What wisdom right here. Every court should basically try to do what they're supposed to do all the time. And don't just defer things up. Don't get in the habit of asking for help on every single little thing. Maybe we should say that references should be unusual to some degree or another.
Yeah. Well, and I think, too, this comes back to our doctrine of the church and why we are different than either a congregational or episcopal form of government where, I mean, in a congregational church, they don't have anybody to ask. I mean, maybe the association, but there's no requirement. None of these things apply in a congregationalist church.
Pastor could ask his dad, but that's probably about as.
There you go.
That's about it.
His dad may be his boss, but in even like in an Episcopal church where the bishop is apart from you, outside of your organization in one sense, and he stands above you, and so you ask that advice, and it's really sort of coming not quite ex cathedra, but I mean there's a sense in which it's coming down from on top. But in the essence of the Presbyterian government is that at every level, from the General Assembly down to the session, it is made up of presbyters, men gifted and called by God to do the work that God has given them to do. And so you have both the blessing of God working in the local church through the gifts that he's given to those men as they do the work that's before them. You have that blessing, but you also have the blessing of, okay, this is too difficult, too new, too strange for us. And so we're going to ask our brothers in a higher court of which we are a part, right? It's not going to somebody outside you, but asking this group that you are actually a part of to say, can you help us with this? And so it's the both and, right? It's a great reminder that a local session is by God's design and gifting and calling sufficient to do the work of that church. And yet at those moments at which it comes upon issues that it feels more keenly its own insufficiency, it has the opportunity to ask for help from brothers who they labor alongside in their presbytery or presbyteries in the General Assembly.
So Fred and I talked about this last week. It's back to 11.3 in the book. All church courts are one in nature, constituted of the same elements, possessed inherently of the same kinds of rights and powers, and differing only as the Constitution may provide. We're one church, and so we act like that. Yeah, it's super cool. I'm glad not to be a Baptist when we get to stuff like this. Yeah, I mean, also my dad wouldn't know what to tell me what to do. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dad. Everybody okay?
Well, and then the other piece, the idea that just by giving a reference does not obligate a higher court. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to take up the matter. And particularly, again, I mean, in judicial cases, it can say, whether it's for the reasons we just talked about a minute ago, no, we take it up, he's going to lose a level of an appeal or whatever else, or because it just says, look, you're closer to the situation than we could ever be. And sometimes that's bad, being that close to the issue. Sometimes it's the only way you could ever get to the, to the matter at hand. Like, those people, their character, you're going to be able to determine who's more believable, let's say, than others because of your close association with those members of your church, if they simply come before the presbytery and we don't know them from Adam, how are we going to do that part of our responsibility to determine who, what witness, what testimony we need to weigh heavier or higher than the other? And that's, again, one of the reasons why, you guys will get to that later, but even under appeals and complaints, that idea of the great deference that the higher court is to give to the lower court in matters of believability of testimony. Well, you know them better. So even in that case, even outside of the review and control aspect, you're much better able, hopefully, to make those determinations. And so there could be a lot of reasons why they don't want to take it up. I do think it's important, though, that if they're asked for advice, ordinarily, and again, ordinarily is a marvelous word, doesn't mean always, but certainly under normal circumstances, if you're asked for advice, you should give it. And I don't know of many instances in where a higher court has ever refused to do that. Now, they may refuse in the sense we talked about earlier, where they said, that's a stumper. We don't know the answer either. Right. We'll send this up, but that's different, I think, than saying, no, we're not going to give you any advice on that matter.
Isn't it Scott's favorite word in the book, ordinarily? Jared?
I think ordinarily it is.
41.6. When a court makes a reference, it ought to have all the testimony and other documents duly prepared, produced, and in perfect readiness, so that the higher court may be able to fully consider and handle the case with as little difficulty or delay as possible. I'll ask the question that's in my head. What's the difference between 41.4 and 41.6? 41.4 says it has to be accompanied with so much of the record as is necessary, and 41.6 says it should have everything put together and sent up so that they can make a decision quickly. Is there a difference?
It seems like you have to take that testimony. So if there's some testimony that you need to get, don't make the court do it. Try to take that testimony and then send it up, as kind of how I read it.
Yeah. Sure. So if there's anything they need to make the decision or give the advice, you need to take care of that so that they don't have to.
Which is what 41.4 says. I think it just sort of expands it. I do think it's actually interesting, though, that it says in perfect readiness. I mean, I would think our doctrine of original sin and total depravity would suggest that there is no such thing as a perfectly ready record of the case. But
Jared, did you go look up the history of this chapter or any of these sections? I didn't glance at that webpage today.
It's nearly blank. Either there's no history to it, but if you look at Ramsey, this is so much of 41 is word for word.
41.6 just sounds and reads so archaic, almost like that perfect readiness line, Steve. Like that just seems like an old way to say something.
Yeah, this is 1800s language.
Maybe 41 needs some overture work. Maybe we'll play with that sometime. What else should we say?
Ramsey is a little. Does take some. I looked at it earlier today, but it talks about this idea, that you can make a reference at any stage, right? It's not just before the trial begins. Like you could start taking testimony and go, oh, wait a minute, this is way outside, whatever, and then. But at that point, obviously, everything that you've taken thus far, you don't roll back. And say, well, let's start over again at the indictment level. I mean, you take what you've got to that point and you send it up and you say, this is where we stopped. This is where we found out. We can't go further. But he also says this, manifestly, which is an interesting word because none of us saw this, but manifestly, it is not contemplated that a judicial case will be referred before the evidence has all been taken. And yet this is not forbidden, since the very difficulty might hang around questions as to the taking and admission of evidence. So, it seems that he's saying, again, ordinarily, that once you begin something, you're going to take all of that testimony up until the point where you have to make a decision. And then you're like, okay, given all the testimony we've taken, we can't make a decision. Now we're going to give a reference. That seems to be the more ordinary idea, not in the sense of how it actually works, but in how the sense of at least how Ramsey's reading it. But that at least it's possible that somewhere in the middle, you come to a difficulty even of taking the evidence or determining what evidence is applicable. And in one sense, I mean, I could see that as a major issue in a trial where someone, wants to admit evidence and the court is divided on whether or not that evidence is actually admissible. Because if you just simply go forward and then it goes to appeal, not only is the inadmission of that evidence in one sense an appealable issue, but you actually can't bring the evidence in at the appeal, right? You can't bring new information in an appeal that wasn't before the lower court. And so if you're evenly divided or seriously divided, you can't decide which way to go. That may be a good issue that you send up and say, either A, give us advice, tell us, should we allow this or should we not? Or B, regardless of what advice you give us, we're just asking you just to take the thing and to run with it.
All right. Everybody feel okay?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Feel good?
That was fun. Well, as Scott's lead-ridden house would ordinarily say, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about what we've talked about, you can check out the show notes, but I don't think there's going to be anything there. Thanks to Steve for joining us. Listeners, this is episode 98 of Polity Matters, and we have big plans for episode 100, which happens to fall right around our second birthday. So stay tuned in a couple of weeks for what's coming. We don't know what it'll be, and in fact, I might even have to add something to the end of this episode in a month when we air it to let you know what the details are, but pay attention. If you have enjoyed the show, do consider following us on Twitter and Facebook at Polity Matters, and make sure that you're subscribed in your podcast app of choice. If you have questions or comments, you can contact us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. You can go to politymatters.org and see lots of details about the show. And there's also a link somewhere in all these different places where you can click and support our work. And we can get you some access to some, supporter-exclusive social groups and other things like that. I don't know if you want to be a part of it. It gets a little weird, but it's kind of fun. So jump in if you feel like it. Let me know. Thanks again for spending your valuable time with us. And until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Bye, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
Y'all take care.